Assalamu alaikum students. Safir Hussain is back with another lecture for your subject Stylistics, and today we shall talk about a very important technique or a very important method writers use in their literature, in their pieces of writing to make their writings prominent and make different parts of their writing very easy to understand or interesting or prominent. So let's have a look at what foregrounding is. So foregrounding is defined by a linguist. He's a very famous linguist, M.A.K. Halliday, and he defines foregrounding as motivated prominence. Or if we have a look at a complete definition of his, it says that the phenomenon of linguistic highlighting, whereby some features of the language of a text stand out in some way. So, according to Halliday, foregrounding is where a writer chooses his language or linguistic content in such a way that some part of or some features of the words or the language, they stand out, they become prominent than the rest of the others. Than the rest in some way, and there may be many ways of foregrounding. So motivated prominence means that a writer intentionally makes something prominent in his writing. It may be a word, it may be a phrase, it may be a sentence, it may be a whole complete paragraph, it may be a complete line, etc. So anything that a writer makes prominent intentionally for artistic purposes, for purposes of beautifying the language or giving some particular meaning or producing some particular effect, that prominence or that motivated prominence, that linguistic highlighting is termed as foregrounding. And we would have some other definitions as well. As you can see that it's linguistic strategies. So foregrounding is a linguistic strategy, or it is many linguistic strategies that call attention to themselves and causing the reader's attention to shift away from what is said to how it is said. So if a writer uses a strategy, uses a method, he or she writes in such a way that the attention of the reader is shifted from what is said, from the content to the method of saying it, from what is said to how it is said. So that again would be foregrounding. And a definition we have here by Paul Simpson, whose book I have already uploaded in the reading materials. He defines foregrounding, saying that he says foregrounding refers to a form of textual patterning. So it is a form of textual patterning. A text is patterned in such a way. A writer gives a specific pattern to his text in such a way that which is motivated specifically for literary aesthetic purposes. And earlier you can see that Halliday defines it as motivated prominence. And what is the motivation? The motivation is here made clear by Paul Simpson. Says that motivation is specifically for literary and aesthetic purposes. So a writer highlights something by using different methods. This linguistic highlighting may be done in many ways, and why it is done, what is the motivation behind it, is done for literary purposes and aesthetic purposes. So you can have another definition here, and it says that the practice of making something stand out from the surrounding words or images. It is again very simple definition, and it says that if something is made prominent from the rest of the words, from the surrounding words or images, it would be foregrounding, or the word, the text, the phrase, the sentence, the paragraph would be termed as foregrounded paragraph or foregrounded text. You can read this. This topic is all about how and why writers foreground parts of their text and what meanings and effects are associated with these foregroundings. The theory of foregrounding is probably the most important theory within stylistic analysis. You got to note that. And foregrounding analysis is arguably the most important part of the stylistic analysis of the text. So you can see in this very passage paragraph, there are certain things which are made prominent from the rest of the text. You can see the word foreground here. It is prominent from the rest of the words or sentences. And again, foregrounding here, this word is highlighted from the rest of the words. Again, you can see the word stylistic analysis is highlighted by using a capital S here and a capital A here. So you can see there are three foregrounded or prominent words in this whole paragraph. So how has the writer made them prominent, foregrounded them? He has used capitalization here, again capitalization and bold, and here he has also used some capitalization, so that these three words or four words are foregrounded or prominent from the rest of the words. Now, how do the writers, how do the artists, the dramatists, poets, novelists, whatsoever different kinds of or forms of writings we have, how do they foreground something? They do foregrounding by using a stylistic distortion of some sort. They distort something, they change something in an abnormal way, or they change something which is a bit different from the normal. And how do they distort something? Either through an aspect of the text which deviates from a linguistic norm. So if there is a linguistic norm, if there is a specific rule, or if there are rules and regulations, just like we have grammar or other rules, we have semantic rules, we have morphological rules of making words, we have semantic rules of combining words to make them something meaningful. So if a writer deviates from that rule or from linguistic rules or norms, from the rules and norms of the language, that part, that word, that phrase, sentence, paragraph would be a deviated paragraph, because the writer has or would have deviated. He has gone away from the normal course, normal route, and normal way of writing something. So that's deviation. Then another aspect through which the writers foreground or make something prominent is where an aspect of the text is brought to the fore through repetition or parallelism. So if a writer wants your attention or to be focused on something, or if he or she wants to foreground something, he or she may repeat something many times, so that repetition will get the reader's attention on it, that the writer has repeated it so many times, so it must be important. And through parallelism, again parallelism is using parallel structures. We would study deviation and parallelism in detail now. So what is deviation? So deviation occurs when we have a set of rules or expectations which are broken in some way. Like the way this font has just changed, you can see that there is a proper pattern to this text. These words, deviation occurs when we have etc. These words are in a particular text, and we expect the rest of the sentence to be in the same font type and size, but you can see that these words or this sentence, like the way this font is just changed, it is different from this pattern or this font type and font size. So you can say that in this sentence, in the second sentence, the writer has deviated from the font type he was using, or he has used in the first sentence. So if a writer breaks the rules or expectations in some way, we would term it as deviation. And what does this do? This deviation from expectation, it produces the effect of foregrounding. You can see that from these two sentences, this one is more prominent than this one, because it has changed its font type from here. So it attracts attention and aids memorability, and it would be easy for the reader to memorize it or to get it in his memory in an easy way, because it is a bit different. It would be a bit different from the rest of the text. So now I have a task for you. You can see there are two lines here in bold form and there are two blanks here. So these are two lines from the poem by a famous American poet, Wallace Stevens. The title of the poem is Of Mirror Being, and it begins by these two lines. These are the beginning lines of the poem. And you can see that each of the lines below has a head noun missing from a noun phrase. So there is a noun phrase, this one, of the, and the blank, and the last, and the blank. So you can see the head noun is missing. So what you have to do is you have to fill in what you think would count as normal nouns to fill these slots, these blanks, and compare with what you thought of with what Stevens actually wrote. So you have to pause the video here, pause it, and think of what could come in the blanks, and then we will move on to the actual text Stevens he actually had written in the first two lines of this poem. So students, did you come up with something that could fill these blanks? Did you think of something? Let me give you an example. The palm at the end of the city beyond the last house. You can fill these two blanks with, in the first blank you might put city here, the palm is a tree, the palm at the end of the city, or the palm at the end of the block, or the palm at the end of the road, the palm at the end of the field, at the end of the jungle, etc. You can put the name of any common or specific place here. And beyond the last, again you can put any noun here, beyond the last house, beyond the last again you can say any other tree, or beyond the last post, beyond the last building, beyond the last again house, etc. But let's have a look at what Stevens, this poet, actually wrote. And you can see that he has written the palm at the end of the mind, beyond the last thought. So now these two lines, or these two nouns the poet has actually written, they might seem very strange to you, and therefore, as they seem strange because they seem to be having deviated many things, having broken many rules of the language, or the grammar, etc. So they are foregrounded, or they are prominent from the rest of the words, because the palm is, there is no deviation, breaking of rule here. Beyond the last, there is no breaking here. But end of the mind is a strange thing to say, because do we have end of the mind? Is mind something physical of which we have end? And again, thought, can thoughts be counted, that I had one thought or two thoughts or three thoughts, so that you could say the last thought? Again, this is something very strange. So these two foregrounding or deviations here are actually semantic deviations. These are deviations of the meaning. They are not correct according to the meaning, because you cannot have an end of the mind and you cannot have a last thought, so you cannot count thoughts. So again, you can see end of mind is semantically deviant. It's though according to the structure it is okay, there is no problem in the word, or in it being singular or plural, etc. So there is no problem of the structure here. The problem is related to the meaning these words are giving in these two lines. So end of the mind is something strange, because if we say end of the mind, it presents mind as something limited, or as something physical made up of some object or concrete. But actually mind is not something which is limited, or mind is not something which is concrete or physical, which is made up of something. Again, the second deviation is there, a palm in the mind. You cannot have a tree in your mind. Is a tree growing in your head, inside your mind? No, it cannot happen. Again, beyond thought. So if we say beyond thought, away from that thought, after that thought, so it again presents the word thought, the concept thought, as something physical, that there is a thought and there is something beyond that thought. So again, thought is something abstract and you cannot have beyond. So there are many contradictions here, semantic deviations, deviations regarding the meaning of these words. The contradictions here are end versus beyond. You can see first he says at the end of the mind, then he says beyond the last thought. It means that the mind ends and then there is the last thought. So you cannot have a thought after the end of the mind. So again, there is a contradiction. And then limited mind, he presents mind as something limited by saying end of the mind, and although there are unlimited thoughts in a person's mind, so how can something unlimited be inside something limited? So there are many contradictions here. Now we have another task for you. There is a phrase in front of you. There are two words and a blank, and you have to fill this missing word, a dash ago. So normally what would you put in here? You would say a minute ago, a month ago, a week ago, a year ago, etc. So you would put something which is related to time. But let's have a look at what actually there should be. So you should would put something like year, month, or day, or week. Why would you do that? Because you have to put something according to the grammatical structure. You can see there is an article here, so that article forces you to write something which is countable and something which is concrete, which is the grammatical constraint here, which because of the grammar you are limited to write something which is countable and something which is concrete. So you are restricted, your choice is restricted by the grammar. And then you can see, because of the word ago, you have to write something related to time, because ago is a word related to time. So because of semantic consistency, because of the meaning of this word ago, which refers to something related to time, you have to write something which is related to time. And this is the semantic consistency, or if you want to keep that phrase a dash ago semantically or meaning wise consistent, you have to write something related to time. That's why you have thought of year or month or day or week to be filled in the blank. But if we have a look at the actual word, actually this phrase has been taken from the poem of a Welsh poet, poet belonging to Wales. His name is Dylan Thomas, and he has written a poem, and this is actually the title of the poem he has written. The title of the poem is A Grief Ago. You can see that this word grief here, it breaks both the rules we have noticed. It is not grammatically correct, because grief is not something countable, and again it is also semantically deviant or semantically inconsistent, because grief is not something related to time. So a grief ago is a strange title or a strange phrase, and it would catch your attention because of this breaking these rules, because of this deviation. And why does that writer wrote grief there, and why did he deviate? So the semantic oddity, the oddness of or oddity of this word grief, according to the meaning, suggests that in this poem, in the poem he has written, time would be measured in terms of emotion. So time would be not measured in terms of weeks or months or years or minutes or seconds. It would be measured in terms of emotions. And it also points towards the fact that human beings perceive the world according to the emotion they are feeling at that time. So if they are happy, time might seem going very fast, and if they are sad or unhappy or waiting for something or someone, they would feel that the time is passing very slowly. So that is something this poet might want to communicate to the readers by putting grief in this phrase and saying a grief ago. And don't get too much tired. This is the last task for this topic, deviation. So imagine a poem or a short story which instead of being set or written in a normal way, is arranged into two columns. You would normally do not find a poem written in this way, in the form of two columns. Here is column 1 and here is column 2, or a short story written in the form of columns. You would not normally see it. So if someone writes a poem or a short story in this way, it would be deviant. It would have broken the rules of something, and that something is orthography. Orthography is the set of conventions of writing in a language. If you write in English language, there are certain rules you have to follow. You would have to start from the left side, you would have to continue to the end of the right side, and then you would begin by using a capital letter. You would end a normal assertive sentence with a full stop. You would put a question mark at the end of a question, etc. So there are many rules of writing a language. We have discussed these earlier in other lectures as well. So if a writer uses a short story in this way, he or she would have broken the rules of orthography. So this poem or this short story would be orthographically deviant. It would be deviant. It have broken the rules of writing in a language. So it would be foregrounded. Because of its deviation, it would become prominent from the rest of the writing. And what do you think about it? What kind of effect such a structure would produce? If a writer writes a short story in this way, what do you think it would the readers would understand or feel about this one? So let's have a look. If a writer may present a short story or a poem in the form of two columns, if he or she is talking about two opposite things, or two things which are opposed to one another, so he would write one thing in one column and the other opposite thing in the second column. For example, representing an argument. If there is an argument between two things, or if there are pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages sort of thing, the writer may write that short story or that poem in the form of two columns. Or if two things are parallel to one another, the writer may again follow the same pattern. For example, if two people are talking at the same time, so the writer would use two columns, and those one column would be mentioning the words said by one person and the other by the other person. Now this pattern of columns has actually been used by writers in their plays and in their poems, in their short stories. So here is an example. Alan Bennett has used it in the part 1 of his play, The Madness of King George. And in this play, there is a scene where the king is being carried away by his servants, and the king is speaking, and at the same time his servants are talking as well. So there are many people talking at the same time, and to represent that situation, the writer has used the form of columns in his play, in a drama. Again, a poet has used it in one of his poems, which is titled as 40 Love. And in this poem, there are two people. There is a couple, and the couple is middle-aged, and they are playing tennis. So you can see that you can consider this divide between the two columns as the net of the tennis, and the words said by the husband and the words said by the wife would be on the two sides of the columns. So again, it is presenting the situation there, situation of playing tennis. The column shape is not only representing the situation of playing tennis, but also representing that the two people are separated from each other, and they might be talking at the same time as well. Again, in the third example, there is example of a short story, Across the Hall, written by Irving Welsh, and he uses this column form in his short story to represent two people, a boy and a girl who live in adjacent rooms. Their rooms are adjacent to each other, and there is only a single wall between those two people. And both of those two, the boy and the girl, they are thinking about each other in their separate rooms. So in order to represent their thoughts, the short story writer has used this shape, this column form. So you can see that this usage of an unconventional way of writing something, a poem and short story and a short a novel or a play, has deviated from the normal rule, and it would definitely attract the attention of the reader or the listener, the reader of the novel or the play. This is it for this lecture. Inshallah, we would study parallelism in another lecture, and till then, goodbye.